The moment I realized my daughter-in-law had erased me from my own son's life was the moment I walked into his house and saw another woman smiling back at me from every frame on the wall. I had driven nearly 40 miles that afternoon to visit Daniel and Sophie after Melissa invited me over for Sunday dinner. The November sky hung low and gray over the highway, and the closer I got to their neighborhood, the tighter my chest felt, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was because Daniel had sounded distracted on the phone lately. Maybe it was because Sophie had stopped asking to spend weekends at my house. Or maybe mothers simply know when something inside a family has shifted quietly out of place. Their new house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac lined with identical maple trees and oversized mailboxes. Melissa opened the door before I even knocked, her smile polished and warm in the way department store mannequins always seem warm. "Evelyn, you made it," she said lightly, stepping aside. The house smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted chicken. Somewhere upstairs, Sophie laughed at something on television. Everything looked beautiful. Perfect even. Melissa always cared about appearances. The hardwood floors gleamed. White flowers sat arranged neatly on the kitchen island. Every throw pillow matched. Every surface looked untouched by real life. I removed my coat slowly and followed her into the living room, where Daniel stood near the fireplace scrolling through his phone. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek without really looking at me. "Traffic okay?" "It was fine," I answered softly, and then I saw the wall. At first, I only noticed it because it was impossible not to. A massive gallery wall stretched across the living room, filled with dozens of framed family photographs in black and gold frames. Vacation pictures, Christmas mornings, Sophie holding pumpkins, Daniel grilling burgers in the backyard, Melissa smiling beside him in nearly every image. And there, over the fireplace, centered like royalty, was Melissa's mother, Linda, holding Sophie in a rocking chair at the hospital the day she was born. I stopped walking. Something cold moved quietly through me. My eyes searched the wall again. Then again. I looked for myself automatically, the way people search for familiar faces in old yearbooks. Surely there had to be one picture. One. Daniel and I at his college graduation. Me holding Sophie as a baby. A Christmas photo from years ago. Anything. But there was nothing. Not a single photograph of me anywhere in that house. Melissa's parents appeared over and over again. Beach trips in Florida. Thanksgiving dinners. Matching pajamas on Christmas Eve. Linda laughing beside Sophie while carving a pumpkin. Linda standing beside Daniel in the kitchen wearing an apron that once belonged to me. My throat tightened. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I was imagining it. Maybe there were more pictures in the hallway. Maybe upstairs. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. This wasn't an accident. People don't accidentally leave someone out of every memory. Beautiful wall, isn't it? Melissa said beside me, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her sweater. I finally finished organizing all the family pictures. Family pictures. I nodded slowly, though my stomach had begun to ache. Daniel glanced up briefly before looking back at his phone. Neither of them noticed the silence that had settled over me. Or maybe they did. Maybe they were simply used to it by now. Above the fireplace, Linda smiled down from her perfect frame like she had always belonged there. Like she had always been the mother of that house. And standing there in the warm glow of someone else's family memories, I suddenly understood something that had been happening to me for years without my noticing it. Melissa hadn't been pushing me away loudly. She had been replacing me quietly. Dinner should have felt warm that night. The table was set beautifully with cream-colored plates, cloth napkins folded into neat triangles, and candles glowing softly beside a bowl of roasted sweet potatoes. Melissa moved around the kitchen with effortless precision, carrying dishes back and forth while Daniel poured wine into tall glasses without once asking if I wanted any. Sophie came running downstairs in pink socks, her blonde curls bouncing as she wrapped her small arms around Melissa's waist. "Mommy said Grandma Linda is coming for Christmas morning again," she said happily before climbing into her chair. Melissa smiled gently. "That is right, sweetheart." I sat quietly at the edge of the table, smoothing my hands over my skirt while trying not to look back at the wall of photographs behind me. Every time I lifted my eyes, I saw Linda's face staring down from another polished frame. I suddenly understood why the house had felt unfamiliar the moment I walked in. It was not because it was new. It was because there was no evidence that I had ever belonged there at all. Daniel carved the chicken while Melissa talked about school schedules and holiday shopping. Their voices blended together into a soft blur as my mind drifted backward through years of memories I had never questioned before. Christmas mornings where Melissa insisted it was easier to celebrate at her parents' house. Thanksgiving dinners moved last minute because Linda already bought the turkey. Birthday parties where I somehow always arrived after the cake had been cut. At the time, each moment had felt small enough to excuse. Families get busy. Young couples need space. That was what I told myself over and over again. But sitting there now, surrounded by proof of my absence, those old memories no longer felt accidental. They felt organized. Grandma Evelyn? Sophie's little voice pulled me back. Why do you not like taking pictures? The room went still for half a second. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice it. Melissa reached for her water glass without looking at me. Daniel lowered his eyes to his plate. My heart gave a slow, painful thud inside my chest. What do you mean, sweetheart? I asked carefully. Sophie shrugged. Mommy said that is why there are not many pictures of you here. Because you do not really like cameras. Melissa laughed softly then, the kind of light laugh people use when they want tension to disappear quickly. Sophie, honey, eat your vegetables. But the damage had already settled quietly into me. I had spent years mailing birthday cards early, showing up with homemade pies, knitting scarves for Sophie every winter, and driving across town whenever Daniel needed help after Melissa returned to work. I had held that little girl when she was sick with the flu at 3 in the morning while Melissa slept upstairs exhausted. I had pictures, hundreds of them. There were albums in my hallway closet filled with birthdays and vacations and first days of school. Memories where I existed. Memories where Daniel once smiled at me the way he now smiled at Melissa's mother. I actually love pictures, I said softly after a long silence. Sophie looked confused. You do? Very much. Melissa finally glanced toward me then, her expression calm but unreadable. I think Sophie meant that we just never got around to hanging many older photos after we moved, she said smoothly. Older photos. As though I belonged to another lifetime now. Daniel cleared his throat and changed the subject to football. Conversation resumed. Forks scraped gently against plates. Candles flickered. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. But something inside me had already shifted permanently. For the first time in years, I stopped wondering whether I had imagined the distance growing between us. Mothers know when they are being slowly removed from their own families. We just spend far too long convincing ourselves otherwise. I stayed less than an hour after dinner ended. Melissa hugged me lightly near the front door while Daniel carried my coat over his arm without meeting my eyes for very long. Sophie waved from the staircase, already distracted by a cartoon playing upstairs. Drive safe, Mom, Daniel said as he opened the front door. Mom. The word sounded automatic now, like something repeated out of habit instead of feeling. Cold wind rushed against my face as I stepped outside, carrying the faint smell of rain and wet leaves across the driveway. I sat in my car for several minutes before turning the engine on. Through the living room window, I could still see the glowing wall of photographs. Warm light spilled across those smiling faces while my own reflection stared back at me from the glass like a stranger. By the time I reached home, the sky had turned completely dark. My little ranch house sat quiet beneath the porch light Harold installed nearly 20 years ago before arthritis stiffened his hands too badly to work with tools anymore. I unlocked the front door slowly and stepped inside to the familiar smell of lavender furniture polish and old books. Everything looked exactly as I had left it that morning. The knitted blanket folded neatly across the couch. Harold's reading chair beside the lamp. Family photos lining the hallway walls. I stood there silently for a long moment before setting my purse down. Then I walked directly toward the hallway. My fingers brushed against frame after frame as I moved slowly down the wall. Daniel at 6 years old holding a fishing pole twice his size. Daniel in his high school football uniform grinning through crooked braces. Daniel dancing with me at his wedding while Melissa smiled beside us. Christmas mornings. Birthday cakes. Hospital pictures after Sophie was born. My entire life existed on those walls. I reached one photo near the end of the hallway and stopped. It showed me sitting beside Sophie on my front porch swing 3 summers earlier. She could not have been older than 5. Her little hand rested against my cheek while both of us laughed at something outside the frame. I remembered that afternoon clearly. Melissa had called asking if I could watch Sophie for just an hour while she went shopping. She returned nearly 6 hours later without apologizing once. At the time, I had simply been grateful for the extra time with my granddaughter. Now, standing there alone in my hallway, a painful thought settled over me. Melissa never minded leaving Sophie with me when she needed help. She only minded letting me remain visible afterward. I sat down slowly on the couch, staring at the framed photographs surrounding me. Suddenly memories began surfacing one after another with terrible clarity. The family beach trip 3 years ago where Melissa said there had only been room for one grandmother in the rental house. The Christmas card that arrived with everyone smiling in matching pajamas except me. The birthday dinner where Melissa posted dozens of pictures online, but somehow none included the seat where I had been sitting all evening. At the time, each moment felt small enough to forgive. Too small to confront. Too small to sound reasonable if spoken aloud. That was the genius of women like Melissa. They did not wound loudly. They erased quietly, bit by bit, smile by smile, until one day you walked into your own son's house and realized there was no trace you had ever belonged there at all. I leaned back against the couch cushions and closed my eyes. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed softly in the silence. The clock above the fireplace ticked steadily forward. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to ask the question I had avoided for far too long. How much of this had Daniel noticed all along? The next morning I woke before sunrise without really sleeping at all. The house felt colder than usual, though the thermostat still read 70 degrees. I stood in the kitchen wearing Harold's old gray cardigan while the coffee brewed slowly beside me. Outside the window, thin frost clung to the edges of the lawn, turning the grass silver beneath the pale morning light. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and stared at nothing for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, I walked into the hallway closet and pulled down the large blue photo albums stacked carefully on the top shelf. Dust floated through the sunlight as I carried them to the dining room table one by one. There were 6 albums altogether. 38 years of birthdays, vacations, graduations, cookouts, Christmas mornings, and ordinary Sundays that once felt too simple to matter. I opened the first album slowly. Daniel at age 8 missing his 2 front teeth. Daniel asleep on Harold's shoulder during a 4th of July parade. Me holding Daniel's science fair ribbon while he grinned proudly beside me. Every page held proof of a life that had once been full and unquestioned. Somewhere along the way, those memories had stopped belonging to me publicly, even though I had lived every single one of them. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed softly on the table. Melissa had posted new photos online. I should have ignored it. Instead, I clicked. The first picture showed Sophie smiling beside Linda at a craft fair downtown. The caption read, "3 generations of strong women." I stared at those words until they blurred slightly on the screen. 3 generations. Melissa, Linda, Sophie, as though I had never existed between them at all. My chest tightened slowly, not with anger this time, but with something quieter and far more painful. Recognition. I kept scrolling. Thanksgiving dinner from last year. Linda carving turkey beside Daniel while Melissa laughed from across the table. Matching Christmas sweaters beside a fireplace that looked exactly like the one in their new house. Family photos at the county fair. School recitals. Pumpkin patches. Every memory carefully arranged to tell the same story. Melissa's family. Melissa's traditions. Melissa's mother. Even the comments beneath the photos unsettled me. Sophie looks just like her grandmother. Beautiful family. You all seem so close. Nobody asked where Daniel's mother was. Nobody noticed she was missing. Perhaps because Melissa had spent years making sure there was nothing left to notice. I closed the app and leaned back in my chair slowly. Suddenly another memory surfaced with startling clarity. 2 years earlier, I had mailed Melissa a framed photograph of Daniel and me dancing at his wedding reception. It was one of my favorite pictures ever taken. Daniel's hand rested gently against my back while both of us laughed at something Harold had shouted from across the dance floor. I remembered Melissa thanking me politely over the phone when the package arrived. "It is beautiful, Evelyn," she had said warmly. "We will find the perfect place for it." I had looked for that picture last night. It was nowhere in the house. I stood from the table and walked quietly toward the hallway wall again. My fingers touched the edges of the photographs hanging there. Unlike Melissa, I had never removed anyone. Linda appeared in several pictures besides Sophie at birthday parties and school events. Even after everything I felt now, I had never once tried to erase her place in Sophie's life. Because decent people do not build closeness by deleting someone else. They make room. That was when the truth finally settled fully into me. Melissa had not simply been creating memories with her own family. She had been replacing mine. Carefully, patiently, year after year. And somehow the cruelest part was not that she had done it. The cruelest part was realizing Daniel had allowed it to happen in silence. 3 days passed before I heard from Daniel again. Tuesday morning, my phone rang while I was watering the small fern beside the kitchen sink. His name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I simply stared at it. There had been a time when hearing my son's voice could brighten my entire day. Now it filled me with hesitation. "Hi, Mom," he said once I answered. His voice sounded distracted, like someone calling between meetings instead of calling his mother. "Melissa wanted to know if you are still coming for Thanksgiving next week." I turned off the faucet slowly. "I have not decided yet." Silence stretched briefly across the line. "Oh," he replied. "Well, Sophie was asking." I almost smiled at that because children ask for people naturally. Adults are the ones who teach them who matters and who does not. "How is she?" I asked softly. "Good. Busy with school stuff." Another pause followed. Small talk had become the entire shape of our relationship now. Weather, schedules, grocery store conversations pretending to be family. Before hanging up, Daniel added casually, "Melissa has been redoing some rooms in the house, so if things look different Sunday, that is probably why." My hand tightened slightly around the phone. There it was. Not an apology. Not confusion. An explanation prepared before I even asked the question aloud. "Different," I repeated quietly. "The photos," he said quickly. "She has been reorganizing things. You know how she is." I looked out the kitchen window toward Harold's old bird feeder swaying gently in the cold wind. I did know how she was. That was exactly the problem. "Yes," I answered after a long moment. "I think I finally do." That evening, I drove to the grocery store just before sunset. The aisles were crowded with people buying cranberry sauce and canned pumpkin for Thanksgiving dinners that still meant something to them. I moved slowly through the produce section, picking up only a few things. Soup, bread, tea bags. Near the dairy aisle, I heard someone call my name. "Evelyn." I turned to find Margaret Lewis pushing a shopping cart toward me. Margaret had lived 2 streets over from us for nearly 30 years before downsizing to a condo last spring. She and Harold used to sit together during neighborhood barbecues talking about baseball, while the rest of us cleaned dishes inside. "It has been forever," she said warmly, pulling me into a quick hug. "How are you doing?" "I am all right," I answered automatically. Older women become experts at saying those 2 words even when they are not true. Margaret studied my face for a second longer than most people would have. "You look tired." I gave a small laugh. "I suppose I am." We stood talking beside the refrigerators for several minutes about ordinary things at first. The weather, rising grocery prices, her grandson starting college in Ohio. Then, almost casually, she mentioned seeing Daniel and Melissa recently at the Fall Craft Festival downtown. Melissa's mother was there too, she said. They looked like one big happy family. Something in her tone made me glance up. Margaret hesitated before continuing carefully. "I almost asked where you were, but honestly, Evelyn, lately it always seems like they present themselves as though Melissa's family is the only family Daniel has." The words settled heavily between us. Not cruel. Not dramatic. Just honest. I looked down at the carton of milk in my hands. "You noticed that too?" Margaret sighed softly. "Honey, people notice more than you think. We just do not always know whether it is our place to say anything." My throat tightened unexpectedly, because for years I had convinced myself I was imagining it all, that I was overly sensitive, too emotional, too lonely after Harold passed away. But standing there beneath the fluorescent grocery store lights while holiday music played softly overhead, I realized something important. The quietest kind of heartbreak is the kind other people can see long before you allow yourself to admit it. Thanksgiving arrived colder than expected. That year, a thin layer of ice coated the edges of my front steps that morning, and the maple tree in my yard had finally lost almost all its leaves. I stood at the kitchen counter stirring gravy slowly while the local news murmured quietly from the television in the other room. For the first time in nearly 40 years, I considered not going to my son's house for Thanksgiving dinner. The thought sat heavily inside me all morning. Around noon, Sophie called unexpectedly from Daniel's phone. "Grandma Evelyn, are you coming today?" she asked brightly. In the background, I could hear dishes clattering and Melissa giving instructions to someone. "I am still thinking about it, sweetheart," I answered carefully. "Well, Grandma Linda is already here," Sophie said. "Mommy let her help decorate the table this year." Something about the innocent excitement in her voice made my chest ache. "I am sure it looks beautiful," I replied softly. After hanging up, I looked around my quiet kitchen. The small turkey breast I had bought for myself rested untouched beside a bowl of mashed potatoes meant for one person. For a long moment I imagined staying home, lighting a candle, watching old movies, protecting what little dignity I still had left. But another part of me knew that disappearing completely would only make Melissa's work easier. So at 4 o'clock I picked up my pecan pie, put on Harold's wool coat, and drove across town beneath a darkening gray sky. The moment I stepped into Daniel's house, I felt it again. That strange sensation of entering a place where everyone else belonged more than I did. Laughter drifted from the dining room. The smell of turkey and cinnamon filled the air. Melissa's family moved comfortably through the kitchen carrying serving dishes and wine glasses like they owned the space. Linda stood near the stove wearing one of Melissa's aprons while Daniel basted the turkey beside her. They looked effortless together. Familiar. Like a family unit already completed long ago. "Evelyn made it," Melissa announced politely as she took the pie from my hands. Not warmly. Politely. There is a difference older women learn to hear immediately. I smiled faintly and removed my coat. "Grandma Evelyn." Sophie ran toward me and hugged my waist tightly before lowering her voice. "Mommy said maybe next year we can all match pajamas too." I froze briefly. Matching pajamas. Another tradition I had watched through photographs online every Christmas morning for the past 4 years. Melissa's family smiling beside the fireplace while I sat alone in my own living room opening gifts mailed days earlier. "Maybe," I answered gently. During dinner I noticed something else. A framed Thanksgiving photo from the previous year sat near the dining room window. Everyone at the table smiled brightly beneath autumn decorations. Daniel, Melissa, Sophie, Linda, Melissa's father, even Melissa's younger brother and his girlfriend. My chair sat visibly empty at the far end of the table. I remembered that evening clearly now. Melissa had called 2 hours before dinner saying Sophie felt overtired, and they wanted to keep the gathering small. I had eaten canned soup alone while watching reruns on television. Yet there they all were smiling in the photograph from that same night. My eyes lingered on the frame too long because Daniel suddenly noticed. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly before he reached over and adjusted the picture face down against the table. Such a small movement. Quiet. Fast. But it told me everything. He knew. Maybe he had always known. The realization settled into me with surprising calm. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Something colder. Acceptance. Because betrayal hurts differently when it comes from silence instead of cruelty. Melissa may have arranged the photographs, but Daniel had stood beside her while she did it. And somehow that hurt far more than anything she had ever done alone. After Thanksgiving, something inside me changed quietly. Not dramatically. I did not call Daniel crying. I did not confront Melissa across the dinner table. I simply stopped reaching first. For years, I had been the one holding the relationship together without realizing it. I called every Sunday afternoon. I mailed birthday cards early. I baked Sophie's favorite cookies before school recitals. I sent thoughtful Christmas gifts wrapped carefully with handwritten notes. And somewhere along the way, I began wondering what would happen if I stopped carrying all the weight alone. The answer arrived faster than I expected. 3 days passed after Thanksgiving without a single call from Daniel. Then 5. Then 8. No messages. No photos of Sophie. Nothing. By the second week of December, the silence had become almost surreal. I kept expecting my phone to ring while folding laundry or reading in Harold's old recliner, but it never did. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. It meant my absence was not disrupting their lives at all. One snowy afternoon, I drove to the local bookstore downtown to buy Christmas presents for the church toy drive. Harold and I used to volunteer every December before his health declined. The children's section smelled faintly of cinnamon coffee from the cafe next door, and soft Christmas music played through hidden speakers overhead. I was carrying 2 storybooks toward the register when I heard Sophie's voice nearby. "Grandma Evelyn?" I turned quickly. Sophie stood near a display of holiday puzzles wearing a red coat and knitted mittens. Melissa stood several feet away scrolling through her phone while balancing shopping bags against one hip. Sophie ran toward me immediately and wrapped her arms around my waist. "I missed you," she whispered. The words hit me harder than they should have. I knelt carefully to straighten her scarf. "I missed you too, sweetheart." Melissa finally looked up then, surprise flickering briefly across her face before her usual polished smile returned. "Evelyn," she said lightly. "What a coincidence." Coincidence. As though we were distant acquaintances unexpectedly meeting at an airport instead of family. "Hello, Melissa." Sophie tugged gently on my sleeve. "Mommy says everyone is busy during Christmas this year." I glanced toward Melissa quietly. "Is that so?" Melissa adjusted the strap of her purse with smooth, calm movements. "Things have just been hectic lately. Daniel has been traveling more for work." I nodded slowly. Another reasonable explanation. Melissa always preferred explanations that sounded practical because practical things are difficult to argue with. Sophie reached for my hand again. "Are you coming Christmas morning this year?" she asked hopefully. Before I could answer, Melissa spoke gently over her. "We have not finalized plans yet, honey." Finalized plans. Such careful language for something as simple as inviting a grandmother to Christmas. Sophie frowned slightly. "But Grandma Linda is already staying with us Christmas Eve." There it was again. Not cruelty, just quiet positioning. Melissa's family included automatically. Mine discussed later like optional details. I looked down at Sophie's hopeful face and suddenly understood something painful. Children believe whoever is consistently present belongs most deeply in their lives. And Melissa had spent years controlling exactly who appeared consistently around Sophie. "I brought your drawing home," Sophie whispered suddenly. "The one from school." My throat tightened. "You did." She nodded proudly. "Mommy was cleaning papers out, but I kept it." For a brief moment, neither Melissa nor I spoke. Then Sophie reached into her little coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper covered in crayon drawings. In the center was a picture of me holding her hand beneath a bright yellow sun. Across the top, written in crooked second-grade handwriting, were the words, "My Grandma Evelyn." I stared at that paper quietly while emotion rose slowly into my chest. Because after months of feeling erased from their walls, their traditions, and their carefully arranged family image, a 6-year-old little girl had unknowingly done the one thing nobody else in that family had bothered to do in years. She remembered me openly. Christmas morning arrived quietly. Snow covered the neighborhood in a thick white blanket, softening every rooftop and mailbox outside my living room window. I woke before dawn out of habit and sat alone beside the tree Harold and I had decorated together for decades. The colored lights reflected faintly across the old ornaments we had collected through 40 years of marriage. Tiny wooden angels Daniel made in elementary school still hung near the bottom branches. Sophie's handmade glitter snowflake from kindergarten rested beside them. I held my coffee mug carefully between both hands while the silence settled around me. No phone call came that morning. No invitation. No last-minute message saying plans had changed. By 10 o'clock, I stopped expecting one. Around noon, I carried a plate of cinnamon rolls to the church shelter downtown where volunteers served holiday meals every Christmas. The dining hall smelled like coffee, baked ham, and wet winter coats drying near the heaters. Families filled long folding tables while children colored paper ornaments with broken crayons. Nobody there knew anything about Melissa or carefully arranged family photographs. Nobody looked at me like an extra person standing awkwardly at the edge of someone else's life. An older man named Walter helped me carry trays into the kitchen, while telling me stories about his grandchildren in Arizona. A young mother thanked me for giving her little boy an extra cookie. For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar settling slowly inside me. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but relief from constantly trying to earn a place where I should have already belonged naturally. When I returned home that evening, my answering machine blinked softly near the kitchen counter. One new message. Daniel's voice filled the room a second later. "Hey Mom. Sorry we missed you today. Things got kind of hectic here. Sophie wanted to call earlier, but everyone was opening presents and..." He paused briefly. "Anyway, Merry Christmas. We will talk soon." I listened twice before deleting it. Not angrily, calmly, because suddenly I understood something important. People make time for what matters naturally to them. Melissa never needed to force Daniel to forget me completely. She only needed to make excluding me easier than including me. And over time, convenience became tradition. Later that night, I sat at the dining room table wrapping the final gifts for the church toy drive when my phone buzzed unexpectedly. A photo message from Sophie appeared on the screen. My heart tightened instantly. It was a picture of her sitting cross-legged on the living room floor in matching plaid pajamas beside Melissa and Linda. Wrapping paper covered the carpet around them. But what caught my attention was not the photograph itself. It was the message underneath, written carefully in second-grade spelling. "I saved you a seat by me, but Mommy said maybe next year." I stared at those words for a very long time. There was no cruelty in them. Only honesty. The kind children speak before adults teach them how to hide uncomfortable truths politely. I looked around my quiet dining room. One candle flickered softly beside Harold's old snow globe collection. Outside, snow continued falling steadily against the dark windows. And sitting there alone on Christmas night, I finally stopped mourning the family I kept trying to return to. Because the painful truth was this. You cannot force your way back into a place where someone has spent years quietly teaching others to live comfortably without you. That night, for the first time since Harold died, I made a decision entirely for myself. I would stop standing outside closed emotional doors waiting for someone to invite me in again. January arrived with sharp winds and long quiet evenings. The Christmas decorations slowly disappeared from my neighborhood, one porch at a time, and life settled back into its ordinary routines. But something inside me no longer felt suspended in sadness the way it had for months. I stopped checking my phone constantly. I stopped wondering whether Melissa would finally change. Most importantly, I stopped measuring my worth by how often my son invited me into his home. One Saturday afternoon, I decided to reorganize the attic. Harold used to joke that I stored 30 years of memories up there because I could never throw anything away. Dust coated the old wooden shelves while winter light filtered weakly through the small circular window near the roof. I spent hours sorting through boxes filled with baby clothes, school projects, faded Christmas wrapping paper, and family albums. Near the back corner, I found an old plastic container labeled Daniel and Sophie. Inside were dozens of photographs I had forgotten existed. Daniel teaching Sophie to ride a bicycle in my driveway. Sophie asleep against my shoulder during a thunderstorm. Harold helping her decorate cookies while flour covered the kitchen counters. Real moments. Honest moments. Nothing staged. I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, slowly turning photograph after photograph beneath the soft afternoon light. Then I noticed something else. Several pictures had small bent corners, as though someone had once removed them quickly from frames. One photo stopped me completely. It showed all of us standing together on Christmas morning 5 years earlier. Me, Daniel, Melissa, Sophie, Harold. Even Linda stood smiling near the fireplace holding a mug of coffee. I remembered that morning clearly because it had been the last Christmas before Harold became too weak to travel. Everyone looked genuinely happy. Yet somehow that version of our family no longer existed anywhere except forgotten boxes in my attic. A week later, Sophie came to visit unexpectedly, while Daniel attended a work conference nearby. Melissa had reluctantly agreed to let her spend the afternoon with me, because school was closed for a teacher training day. The moment Sophie walked inside, she kicked off her snow boots and ran straight toward the living room shelves lined with old family photographs. "You have so many pictures," she whispered with wide eyes. I smiled softly. Families leave behind a lot of memories over the years. We spent the afternoon baking chocolate chip cookies while snow drifted quietly outside the kitchen windows. At one point, Sophie wandered into the hallway and stopped in front of the large framed wedding photograph of Harold and me. "That is Grandpa Harold?" she asked. "It is." She studied the picture thoughtfully. "Why are there not pictures like this at our house?" The question settled gently between us. Children notice absences more honestly than adults do. I wiped flour from my hands slowly before answering. "Sometimes people decorate homes differently." Sophie frowned slightly. "But Mommy says family pictures are important." I looked toward the hallway wall lined with decades of memories. "They are," I said quietly. Later that evening, Daniel arrived to pick her up just as sunset painted the snow outside pale gold. While Sophie packed her coloring books into her backpack, Daniel wandered silently through the hallway staring at the photographs surrounding him. His expression shifted gradually from confusion to something heavier. Recognition, perhaps. He stopped longest in front of the Christmas picture from 5 years earlier. "I forgot about this one," he said softly. I studied his face carefully but said nothing. After a long silence, Daniel looked around my house again. Every wall held proof of connection. Birthdays, graduations, vacations, ordinary Tuesdays. A lifetime where nobody had been cropped out quietly. Sophie tugged on his sleeve then. "Daddy, why are there more pictures of Grandma Evelyn here than at our house?" Daniel did not answer immediately. His eyes moved slowly across the hallway before settling on me with an expression I had not seen in years. Shame. Real shame. And in that moment, standing quietly beneath the warm yellow hallway light, I realized something important. Melissa may have removed me from their walls, but she could never erase the simple truth staring directly back at my son now. I had loved that family openly while they had hidden me away.